Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is Sutta class number 9, Vasa 2022. And the theme today is causality. So hopefully you've done your homework, read up the, well, okay, it's your loss then anyway. But even though this maybe sounds like a bit of a dry topic, causality, but it's actually one of the most important teachings of the Buddha. And it runs through all of the Buddha's teachings. I mean, it was the awakening to the principle of causality which allowed for the Buddha's awakening. So if you want to know what awakening's about, then it's about causality. Or I mean, that's the key to it anyway. The key to it is causality. Of course, the Buddha cultivated many different qualities. He said he had quite a few of the right qualities already established in previous lives, they say, in this life. But all he needed was a key of causality on the day of his awakening. If you read the homework, especially the connected discourses, the very beginning of it, I think it's first, anyway, very near the beginning of it, the Buddha talks about it as the key to his awakening, as well as the awakening of the previous 6 Buddhas. So 7 Buddhas. And it could be you too if you read it. well, not just reading it, but understanding it. Understanding it, really. It's one thing to read about it, and even though it may sound a bit abstract, but anyway, we know something about it already because of the principle of kamma. Kamma, the principle of kamma is moral causality. Remember that? Moral causality. Action and result are cause and effect. So we know something about it anyway. Especially if you do investigate a bit about kamma, it is, in one way it's just simple causality, but it's somewhat complicated because it applies to human beings, who are very complicated human beings. Not just me, but human beings in general are very complicated. So kamma and its result are somewhat complex. But the principle still applies in general. And it goes through all of the Buddha's teachings. The 4 Noble Truths are about causality. Suffering, the cause, cessation, path, right? It's causality. Anyway, this theme is so important that if you even understand a little bit of it, your life could be transformed. Are you ready? But again, you have to understand. It's one thing to hear about it, but understanding is the key. But your life could be transformed. Maybe not quite enlightened, but close, if you're ready for it. So ready? Anybody who's not ready to be transformed, maybe you better step outside for the next little while. But Okay, it's so important. Like I say, it's the key to the Buddha's enlightenment. And unfortunately, it's sort of presented usually in the form of what's called the dependent origination, 12 factors. So it seems a bit obscure, but as I say, it goes through all of the Buddhist teachings, from principle of karma, Four Noble Truths. So at its very simplest, the principle of causality is that when something arises, something else arises. When it says, when this arises, then that arises. And when this ceases, that also ceases. Got that? Bit abstract. But anyway, the example is, a relevant example in the Four Noble Truths is that the Buddha says, when there's craving, there is suffering. One thing I should have mentioned, there's a certain qualification to the result. I should have mentioned it with karma and rebirth, is that the result can ripen at 3 different times. Get the result immediately, later in this life, or in a future life. It's also why it's a bit complicated, because sometimes you can't see it directly. But anyway, if there's craving, there is suffering. But the trouble is, most of us focus on the that, you see. When suffering arises, then you wake up to it, so you focus on suffering, rather than look at what caused it. The Buddha is saying that exists because this exists. Right? There's a cause for it. But we're so focused on the that, we get fixated on that, like the suffering, trying to get rid of suffering, trying to ignore it, trying to escape from it, trying to get out of it, when the real issue is this, what caused it. That's the first life transformation. You got that? Instead of focusing on the result, always question, what's the cause? What's the cause? What's the cause? And unfortunately, it's a little bit, it does require some extra wisdom, because, we usually, even our senses, they see what's there, the object out there, you see, rather than question what's giving rise to it, you see. So once we understand this principle, that is caused by something else, everything is everything is a causal principle except for nibbana. Nibbana is the unconditioned, the uncaused. See? But everything else, your suffering and your happiness has a cause. So rather than focus on the suffering and the happiness, which is quite attractive sometimes, or unattractive, but you got to question what the cause is. That was the key to the Buddha's awakening. The Buddha questioned, what's the cause of suffering? Birth. And he goes back through the whole 12 links, you see. The cause of suffering is being born. Oh, right. Instead of trying to get out of suffering, he realized, we got to find out what birth is the cause of it. What's the cause of birth? Coming into existence, then grasping, craving. Okay? He followed right back to its source. Like I said last time, the Buddha probably was the greatest meditator in the history of humanity. Not only had deep meditation, but very clear meditation too, to be able to investigate. How many of us could find out, the cause of suffering as being ignorance? Who would even mention it? Who would even acknowledge it? Me, ignorant? Are you kidding? I'm so clever, but you're still suffering. Anyway, you think you're clever, but you're still suffering. So, but anyway, that's the first insight to recognize. If you experience something, look for the cause of it. Look behind it. Then you can find out, behind it, when this ceases, that ceases. So when you find out the cause, then result ceases. But just trying to bash around, trying to get rid of the result, missing the point, wasting your time. You've got to find what the cause of it is. That's the easy way. That's the easy explanation. The second one, a bit more complicated, maybe. But at least you read this one, right? The treasures, right? The shortened version. Didn't get around to that. Huh? Oh, somebody else was reading it. Okay. But in this also, in that chapter in the Connected Discourses, Samyutta Nikaya, there's also this discourse. So the Buddha says to Kachana, the world usually depends upon the duality of existence and non-existence. But for those who see with perfect realization the truth of the arising of the world, there is not for them any non-existence. For those who see with perfect realization the truth of the passing away of the world, there isn't for them any existence in the world. You get that? People are looking at, again, they're looking at existence, the things that exist or don't exist, rather than looking at the arising and the passing, you see. So if you're looking at the processes involved, rather than the things, you're seeing processes. When do you say something exists? It's all in process, constantly changing. So when do you say, okay, that exists now? Like a plant. Oh, how about human life? When does human life, when you say human life begins? Or when do you say it exists? People still argue, don't they? When life begins. Some people say at conception. The Buddha said life begins when Vinyan enters into the fertilized egg. The trouble is that nobody I've heard of, except the Buddha, knows when that is. Again, the Buddha's unique meditation, he knows when consciousness or Vinyan can go enter a life, you see. But nobody else is able to perceive that. So the Buddhists say, okay, life begins at conception then. Some people say 15 weeks, 24 weeks, fill in the blanks. When the child is born, actually, and life begins. Only when they're 18 years old when they begin, or 21, then you're legal. You can vote at 18, right? I think you can drive at 16, but when does it begin? Because life is an organic process. It's constantly evolving, constantly changing, and at any time, that life can end, can't it? The Buddha said when this consciousness, this Vinyan, can leave the fertilized egg, anytime. So life is there and then it's gone. Just like when does life end also? Thought it'd be simple. Somebody just close their eyes, but maybe they're only in a coma. They aren't dead yet. How do you tell the life has really ended? Got time for a story? When I was in Switzerland, there was somebody we came to know, their son had been involved in an accident, boating accident. They were on the Lake of Geneva, and the boat hit them in the head. So they were taken to the hospital, and the mother went to the hospital, and the doctor said, look at this. They showed him the EEG, totally flatlined. They said, oh, he's dead. She said, but he's breathing. But look at this, he's dead, clinically dead. But she said he's still breathing, he's alive. So they couldn't do anything too. So, but a few days later, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 days later, the mother and the sister were at home getting ready to go and visit him in the hospital. See? And then the mother was in the kitchen, I think. The daughter was in the bedroom or something. And then the mother said, do you smell something? Daughter said, no. He said, what is it? It smells like a hospital. And then the daughter came in a few minutes later and said, do you smell something? It smells like a hospital. Then the telephone rang. Your son stopped breathing. And she said, he's come to say goodbye. Came from the hospital to say goodbye. So when was he actually dead? Or when did life end? Huh? Maybe he's still hovering around somewhere. It's a good thing it's not dark, huh? But see, people are looking at objects, looking at things, you see. So that's the way of the conceptual mind. It exists or doesn't exist, black or white. But with this teaching, then the Buddha says that because of this, when you know the truth of the arising of the world and truth of the passing away of the world, then there's no attachment to exists or non-exists. And this is way, not going to either extreme, the Buddha teaches the middle way of dependent origination. With ignorance as condition, sankhara comes to be. So he gives this formal teaching on causality then. When you understand causality, there are no things that exist in the world. It's all just processes. Yeah. So with that realization, the Buddha was enlightened. Yeah. It's usually pictured, at least traditionally, the Buddha fighting Mara, right? Yeah, he's conquering Mara. The great hero, the good guy, beats the bad guy, you see. The clash of egos, you see. but it's totally false information. Buddha was reflecting on this teaching of just processes, and Mara doesn't exist. Mara is a figment of your imagination, expression of ignorance. So when the Buddha understood this, Mara just poof. No blood, no guts, no drama. Doesn't make great art, I guess. So just peaceful Buddha sitting there with just insights flying around in his brain. So they picture this big battle scene. And I visited a temple a modern temple. I think it might have been the one at Mahamakut University, newly built. And so they had the traditional picture of the Buddha conquering Mara, you see. But in this one, even though they had traditional Thai demons, with their teeth and all that, they were carrying modern weapons, you see. Machine guns and grenade launchers and so the Buddha is still conquering Mara with modern weaponry, though. But very well done, very well drawn, Still not quite getting the point, is he? The Buddha realized that Mara is just in your mind. It's an imagination, you see. When you understand it's just ignorance arising and passing away, then you recognize. Then all the Buddha said was, "I see you, Mara." The Buddha never killed Mara, never killed him. Just said, "I recognize you. I know that you are just an expression of ignorance." As soon as the Buddha knew that, it's gone. So easy, when you're no blood, no guts, no just deep insight. So anyway, the usual presentation, like I say, is in the 12 links of dependent origination, or if you read the discourse number 15 in the long discourses, then there's only 9 in there mentioned. The first 2 were not mentioned, ignorance and sankhara, or habitual activities, not mentioned, because it goes back to vinyan and namarupa. That is bare knowing, and namarupa is mentality, materiality. So those 2 are interrelated, you see. Again, this is a very, very profound insight of the Buddha, that how your knowing triggers off the mental activity. It even according to the Buddha, even this vinyan, this bare knowing, is instrumental in creating rupa, a body. There are the 4 elements, earth, fire, water, air, are here, but it's bare knowing, vinyan, which creates them into a physical body. Because that's a kind of template, the template for life. I mean, fortunately, your vinyan was, your template was, working pretty well, so you got 2 arms and 2 legs rather than 6 legs, and your template was not a spider, it was a human being, so must have had very good karma in a past life, you see. But I guess there are some templates for spiders, of course, Just be careful not to think like one, and then next time you might not be so lucky. Have the wrong thought at the wrong time, and then, yeah. Anyway, these 12 factors, I mean, it is, if you think of the 12 altogether, it can be a bit complicated. We haven't even got enough fingers to count them, have we? 12 factors, how do I get... But sometimes it's easier to look at it, in these 12 factors. I can say if you can remember these 12 factors, you basically have the whole Pali Canon in these 12 factors. All the key elements in the Buddhist teachings are in these 12 factors. Old age, sickness, and death, ignorance, sankharas, Namarupa and Vijnana is, of course, the 5 groups of grasping, 6 senses, feelings like from last time, and then craving, grasping. All the key elements of the Buddhist teachings are in these 12 factors. So in some ways, because in the scriptures, they aren't very well carefully explained. They aren't given a detailed analysis as you would expect in maybe a psychology book or something rather. But very likely they were just used as sort of a way to remember these teachings and then contemplate, reflect upon them, because you can go, you can reflect on all different angles and levels on them. So, for example, one breakdown. Many ways you can break down the 12, make them more comprehensible. But probably the most important one is between feeling, craving, grasping. This is where it moves from the very, very basic functions of life, like feeling, and then with craving and grasping, this is when life begins to get initiated and when suffering begins. Feeling is not yet suffering. Feeling's just pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. You need an I, a self, to say, ouch, it hurts me. But it's just unpleasant feeling tone, arising and passing. As the Buddha also says is about to kachana here. He says that the world is blinded by attachment, grasping, and adherence. For those who do not hold on to grasping and attachment, do not take a stand on myself. There is no doubt or uncertainty that what arises is only dukkha, what is ceasing is only dukkha, and their knowledge is independent of others. That's called right view. So all it is just, feeling arising and passing, feeling arising and passing. But we take it personally. I am suffering. I'm being happy. I'm being sad. And then, of course, you suffer accordingly. But just understanding feelings as a reaction, causal reaction to sensory impingement, what's the problem? There's nobody suffers. There's only, the impermanence, the unchangeableness of things, arising and passing, arising and passing. Nobody gets hurt. That's the safe way. Nobody suffers. But as soon as your craving gets in there, your grasping gets in there, you take it personally, and then good luck in your life. So understanding this particular link, feeling to craving to grasping, maybe you can add into that the coming into existence also. It's like There is the feeling there. There is the craving. Oh, I like it. I like the pleasant feeling. Then there is the craving is just the intention. It's just the desire, the intention. But the grasping is then the reaching out and taking hold of. When you take a hold of something, then it comes into existence. Becomes a tangible thing. And then it's going to pass away. So then you're going to get disappointed. So being able to recognize these feelings just arising and passing and step back. Just a feeling. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Yeah, pleasant, yeah, I like it, but I'm not going to go there. That hurts. Eventually. Another link to reflect upon maybe is the six senses to feeling. Sensory impingement. Yeah, feeling is conditioned by contact, by the six senses. When there's sense impingement, if you have your awareness there, you can notice how different feelings arise by pleasant, unpleasant, mostly neutral, but sometimes you can notice the pleasant or unpleasant. And walking down here and the wind blew and there's a cold chill, and then the sun came out, pleasant again. And it was a long walk, Just 10 minutes, but a lot of pleasant and unpleasant. So it seemed like it was long. Another one which is a bit more psychological maybe is in the Sutta number 15 in the long Discourses, gives quite a long explanation of how Vinyan and Namarupa interrelate. They're interdependent, you see. And of course, hopefully you recognized that Namarupa, mentality, materiality, Nama literally means name, and Rupa is form or substance. Namarupa plus Vinyan, consciousness if you like, bare knowing, is the 5 groups of grasping, right? 4 Namarupa and then Vinyan. But the Buddha is pointing out how these interrelate, you see. How they like bare knowing needs something to know. Yeah? So what does it know? It knows physical sensation, the senses. It knows the feelings, the sanya, the sankhara. It needs the namarupa to have to know. And then, of course, the namarupa, once vinyan is there, it's like vinyan is like awakening of being aware of something. It's like there's just, it's like waking up in the morning, right? You wake up from sleep, and then first there's some kind of knowing. Where am I? What's going on here? Maybe the first thing you're aware of is some sensory impingement, your alarm clock going off, right? First, maybe if you're really alert there at that moment, what's this strange noise? Am I dreaming? It's about time for dreams anyway, isn't it? And maybe it actually chimes in with your dream, maybe. The last sutta class, I had a rest before coming here, and I was very tired for some reason. So it's a day after a picnic day, isn't it? Yes, I had a long walk or something. So I was still a bit resting, and I woke up. I thought I woke up, and I'm rushing down here, and I forgot my notes. And then I really woke up. And realized, oh, I'm safe. I didn't forget my notes. You see. But it was obviously my notes have a very important place in my life, Without my notes, I'm really lost. I really don't know. I'm lost in dreamland then. So I was so relieved when I realized that no, I've still got 10 minutes yet to get my notes. But anyway, the vinyan, the consciousness or knowing, is like the surfacing from just blank or not knowing anything. You wake up, and then you're aware of either some level of mentality, materiality. You're aware of your dreams, memories. You're aware of, mental activity going on. Yes, where am I going? What am I doing? What are my plans for the future? So this knowing needs something. And then, of course, it becomes a seed for more knowing. You know about the memory. The memory triggers off another thought. You know about that too. And you get another thought, another memory, and another back and forth. Another one, which is a bit more obscure, but is also very important, is how ignorance conditions knowing. And when we understand it, when we study about this dependent origination, important to keep in mind a couple of definitions. One is to see it more like from moment to moment. Because otherwise, if you take it to, again, literally, it says when this ignorance ceases, then consciousness ceases. That's not what happens. Doesn't mean as soon as ignorance passes away, you become unconscious. But what it means is that when ignorance passes away, then the ignorance-conditioned consciousness doesn't exist anymore. So there still is life there, even if the Buddha was enlightened. The Buddha, transcended all ignorance, but he didn't die, you see. Sometimes they define nibbana as extinction. It sounds like the Buddha just kind of evaporated or went out or something other, or became extinguished. Became extinct. But the Buddha still lived, you see. But without ignorance, you see. There's no more ignorance-conditioned consciousness. No ignorance-conditioned knowing or distorted knowing, if you like, or lack of knowing. And even though it says on a few occasions that, especially this, the 12 links, dependent origination, they're usually put in a circle, you see. So they link back to each other. So if you come to old age, sickness, and death, and you have not exhausted all the ignorance, then back to square one again, you see. It's like, what is it, snakes and ladders or something? Or the snakes and ladders, a long time ago. Anyway, you're back to the beginning again. Monopoly, maybe it's Monopoly, oh yeah. Yeah. Losing all your money, go back to beginning again, start over. But there is some causes, some conditions for ignorance as well. And the one which is mentioned sort of in detail is that it's sort of a social aspect of ignorance. That if one associates with the wrong people, the asevanacha balanang, association with the fools, is unskillful, or association with the wise, the pundit, is one of the greatest blessings. So association, that's the Mangala Sutta. So associating with unworthy people or unwise people, then that causes not listening to Dhamma teaching. They lead you in the wrong way. See the unnoble friendship, the akalyana mita. Kalyana mita is a noble friend. You see, this is the not so noble friend. They lead you in the wrong way. You see. Now, by not listening to Dhamma, one doesn't gain faith in the teachings. Without faith, one doesn't encourage or develop appropriate attention. What's appropriate to attend to? Without appropriate attention, there's no satipanya, sati sampajanya, no mindfulness and clear comprehension. With no mindfulness, there's no sense restraint, and then one gets involved with the 3 ways of wrong conduct. So that increases ignorance. Just in a relative sense or a social sense, maybe. Most of us have inherent ignorance. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, wouldn't be reborn again. So, I mean, the problem is that, it's pointing out that if one doesn't do something about this inherent or this underlying disposition of ignorance, it's just going to get compounded. I think it was in one of the scriptures, I think I talked about the rebirth. There were some various scriptures about rebirth. Most of them were a bit frightening. One of them, discourse number 129, I think, of the middle-length discourses. I didn't mention it because it's too frightening, but if you need some stirring up, that was the one. There was in that scripture. There is the mention of the blind turtle. The simile of the blind turtle. Yeah. There's a blind turtle in the ocean, the great ocean, and somebody throws a yoke, a life raft, life buoy, into the water, and once in 100 years, this blind turtle comes up out of the ocean. So what are the chances that this blind turtle will put his neck up through that life buoy? Not so much. Once in 100 years. That's the chances of being reborn as a human if you fall into the lower realms, you see. Boy, isn't that scary? Especially if you can't swim. So we just keep compounding the ignorance, in other words, unless we do something about it. So listening to Dhamma teachings, having good friends, supporting a way to go beyond ignorance. The solution to ignorance, the Buddha says, is sort of like a play on words in a way, because ignorance is avijja. So vijja is the way to counter it. True knowledge. True knowledge is a way to counter ignorance then, which is to study the Buddha's teachings and practice it. And of course, I mentioned one particular sutta I put a note on it outside. Sutta number 23 in the Connected Discourses, chapter 12, the second book. And this one is very, very significant because it also shows not only the cause of suffering. The dependent origination shows the cause of suffering. So if you follow it back, ideally you can resolve the ignorance, and the whole thing breaks down. You see, you don't compound the ignorance, don't compound the suffering, etc. But number 23 shows what's called transcendental dependent origination. That shows that a different sequence, it still follows the 12 links. But when it comes to suffering, old age, sickness, and death and suffering, then it goes on in a positive sense. From the suffering arises faith. Another place, the Buddha said that suffering usually gives rise to either search or confusion. So for some people, it requires some suffering to start their spiritual search. And then they maybe gain faith in the practice. And their faith gives them gladness. Gladness gives joy. Then tranquility, happiness, collectedness, and knowledge and vision of the way things really are. Then arises, the nibbida, and then the viraga, dispassion, finally liberation. So, suffering is not always a bad story. It's a bad rap, but it's not always a bad story, because it can lead to faith. And unfortunately, a lot of human beings need a good kick to get them out of their complacency. Sometimes it takes something like suffering to really wake them up, to look for some alternative. We drift along in our complacency, and then suddenly things aren't working the way we want them to work. Got to find some new solution here. So that can lead to possibly finding the right path then. That's probably why most of us are here in the first place, right? If we were happy, we'd be at home watching television or something, watching soap operas in the middle of the day. but here you are studying Dhamma to get enlightened, and hopefully realize liberation. So this theme of causality, I should leave the homework on there for a few days so you can, if you've been inspired, hopefully, you've been encouraged to, buckle down and actually read it and study it. And because any time your life could be transformed. The Buddha, like I say, the Buddha developed many skillful qualities beforehand. He had all the other 7 factors of awakening, if you like, already established. Then he just needed Dhamma Vichayo, investigation of Dhamma. When he investigated according to causality, then, that was the key to it. When he understood the cause of suffering, then the whole thing became clear then. But of course, he did have significant collectedness, meditation, mindfulness, energy, all the other factors already firmly established. So what most of us are doing most of the time here is developing the other skillful qualities. Spending your hours developing collectedness and mindfulness and energy, but don't forget the investigation of Dhamma. So remembering, not to get focused or too over-focused on the result, but look at the cause, what's behind it. Even something like developing the factors of awakening. And many of us can get obsessed with collectedness, the benefits of collectedness, calm mind, but better to look at the cause, what's conditioning it, what's creating it, what's nurturing it. If we can create the right environment to nurture collectedness, it becomes part of our way of life, not just a one-off experience that we drop into once in a while, but it becomes part of our everyday experience, and because we create the right nourishment, the correct fertile soil for it. Same with developing mindfulness. Mindfulness, we've covered a few of the suttas, the suttas about it, and they explained a bit about the process, non-judgmental awareness. But when you understand the principle, we all have some mindfulness already. Just a matter of cultivating it and keeping it going, nurturing it. That's creating the right conditions to keep it going then. So hopefully you've been able to appreciate the value of causality, and then you your life can get transformed, not getting over-focused on the results, but what's the cause? What's the cause? What's behind it? If you notice your life is some degree of suffering in your life, don't worry about the suffering. What's causing it? What's behind it? That's the real issue. When you can remove the cause, suffering collapses by itself. So don't waste yourself trying to fight with the suffering. Look at the cause of it. That's where the real work is important to do. So hopefully you can appreciate the value of causality and continue to understand it, investigate it, and you realize it for yourself, and maybe join all the other Buddhas in a deep understanding of causality.